Hello, everybody. Are you hearing well? So? How about now? So I just wanted to call us to attention and to welcome you all to be here. And the first presentation will be regarding Peggy Erskine. And there's a trio up here who are going to have something to say before she speaks. So I'd like to hand the microphone to Charlotte Hallam, who is going to be the first of us.
I first met Peggy when we were first-year students at Antioch. I'm not sure we should call ourselves freshmen. It's sort of an odd term for Antioch. And she and I had agreed after our first year that I was going to be her roommate when we came back for our second year. And I got here my second year. And I walked across campus and I found out when I registered that I did not have Peggy for my roommate. I had a stranger for my roommate. And I saw Peggy a little later and I said, "Why aren't you my roommate?" And she said, "I got another roommate." I said, "You did?" She said, "Yes, I married David. So now you..." Anyway, so our friendship has continued on and past that time. Peggy and I served on the Alumni board during the Guskin era, and she was the chair of the reunion committee then, and then later went on, as all really super volunteers do, to become actually the director of alumni relations for a period of time, and she ran reunions and alumni relations at the college. She, after that time, has always volunteered and been involved and helped and done things like signing greeting cards when greeting cards are needed and other kinds of things for the college, and anything I think pretty much that she's been asked to do. She and I decided at the work project one year that we were going to go work in the library. We thought, well, we'll go work on books and things and that would be fine. It'll be easier to do than some of the heavy-duty work. Went over to the library and found out that all the lighting fixtures were being changed by the work committee so that we couldn't do that. And they said, well, they need some help in the kitchen. So off to the kitchen we went, and this was at the Presbyterian Church downtown. And I became a very serious pot washer, and Peggy was also a pot washer and a dishwasher and part-time chef. And then after that, the year after, they decided maybe we could cook. And Peggy and I have been in the kitchen at the work project ever since. And Peggy not only has done the things in the kitchen at the work project in terms of cooking and those kind of skills, but she's also put all of the recipes into the computer. She can multiply the recipes by the number of expected people at the work project, and she can print out a shopping list on top of that. So I will let Jim take over and talk about some other aspects of Peggy's history.
Well, the first thing I want to do, though, is to speak to who J.D. Dawson was. Does everybody know who J.D. Dawson was? I think most of us do, but he was head of the co-op program for many years here at Antioch College, and this award is very much in keeping with the manner and the length of time with which he gave to Antioch College. So it's a well-named award. Peggy and I were not in the same class. I started 2 years ahead of her, and her future husband was one of my hallmates, who's sitting here, David. So she came 2 years later, and I was glad to see her. The reason being that we were part of an oppressed minority at Antioch College, which were white Southerners. People assumed certain things about us just for the fact that we came from the South, no matter whether we matched those things or not. So it was always an encouragement to me to find another Southerner here at Antioch College, and she was. Peggy Peggy has never been a outspoken, spectacular person, but she has done spectacular things. I don't have a list in front of me to say all of the things that she has done, but she has worked for the college in the alumni relations office. She served on the alumni board. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And she's lived most of her adult life right here in the Yellow Springs. So she has been very involved and faithful to the college through good times and, more important, through bad times. And we're very indebted to her for her devotion to this school in so many ways. And I would add, in addition, her contributions to the village of Yellow Springs, because she's also been very much involved there. So I'm just delighted that she was selected for this award. And I'd like to pass the microphone on so that we can hear some other aspects.
Hi, I'm going to talk about Peggy's involvement with Work Project, and I'm going to do it as we do most of our reports on Work Project. The class of 60 in 1985 came to a campus that was failing to thrive. Peggy, Mac Palmer, and Bob Press were talking on an evening after they'd been out walking. What can we do to help our college? They asked. We don't have so much money, so let's find a task. Remember our orientation work day? Having a work project would be a good way. So they all returned in 1986 to work on Rice Hall and see what they could fix. Each year after that, more alumni came too and found lots of big jobs for them all to do. Peggy was there joining the work and the fun till she became staff and alumni she'd run. But she'd pop in to paint some dirty old wall, for she never ignored our Antioch's call. Now she's a cook for all of our volunteers, our shopper and pantry throughout the whole year. She's been here with old hips, and new knees. She's our superwoman. So clap for her, please.
For many of you who know me well, you know I'm not very comfortable speaking in large crowds. I much prefer being behind the scenes, so this will be very short. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. One of the reasons this award is so special to me is that it was my personal contact with JD. I was a volunteer member of the maintenance team assembled by Mary Ann Bebco, class of 61, to help him and Nona stay in their home as long as they possibly could as they aged. I treasure the time I was able to spend with him. Someone, and I don't remember who, gave JD a drum-beating bunny toy for his birthday. After that, we all referred to JD as the Energizer Bunny. I'd like to share with you my feelings about why I choose to volunteer. My parents, especially my mother, frequently reminded me how fortunate I was to have been born into my family, a family that truly valued education for both boys and girls. My grandmother was an MD, not a very easy task for a female in 1925, and two of my great aunts were dentists. My family wasn't rich, but they could afford not only to provide the necessities, but were able to purchase tickets for me and my siblings to go to the Children's Symphony and the Children's Theater, and an Antioch education for me. My parents, however, didn't buy tickets to the circus, so we were relegated to standing outside the tent and interacting with the performers as they went in and out, and that was great fun. My parents stressed that the way I could, quote, pay back for my good fortune was to volunteer. I can remember as a child taking my wagon around the neighborhood to collect newspapers and metal coat hangers for the World War II effort. It was probably just a way to get citizens involved as a useful endeavor, but it made me proud. Thus, volunteering has always been part of my routine activities. This brings me to another aspect of volunteering. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I can truly say I always get as much, if not more, out of volunteering than I give. While an Antioch student and after graduation, I led a Girl Scout troop. Several of those girls in that troop still contact with me today. I really like that. For me, volunteering is an important part of my life, and it's also a great way to socialize and to make new friends. Thank you, Antiochians, for this honor. I truly value it.
Do we present the award now?
Questions?
If you want, you said other questions.
Those of you who have been to other of these award ceremonies are aware, and if you haven't, I'll make you aware. This award was designed by a local artist. And for the last couple of 3 years, it's been done that way. Before that, they went to somebody who professionally did award things. And I mean, probably every one of us has one or more of those that are in the back shelf someplace. But this is really very lovely. So we are just really delighted, Peggy, to present you with the J.D. Dawson Award.
If anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer.
Is there a mic, or can I manage without a mic? Actually, Peggy, this is more a comment than a question. You and Mac and Bob Press and Charlotte changed my life. When I was a single mom in 1986,
Hold the button on it.
in 1986, when they announced the first work project, I said, oh, that sounds interesting. I never cared about the idea of reunion. I came in '89 to check out what this mythical work project was all about. I was a single parent of at that point, 9-year-old. In 1990, I came to my first reunion, or my first work project. And the only one I ever missed was in '93 when I took my son west, stopped in Maples, stopped with the Hawthorns, and stopped with Sally in Minnesota, and with Mac and Marjorie in Missoula. I have been to work project every year. Without work project, my life would be very, very different, and so would my son's.
Amen.
Give it to Jones tomorrow.
Thank you, Joan. Yes, this is on. Thank you, Joan. I just want to remind you and brag that I was your hall advisor. So now I have two very illustrious advisees from that hall, you and Eleanor Holmes Norton. Right. And so, Peggy, because you stayed in Yellow Springs, we've never been out of touch, and this has been such a pleasure for me to have you as a friend. And I do remember that when I was president and we had the 150th, the sesquicentennial, you dressed me in 19th century clothes from the Historic Society cache, wherever that is. And so you taught me how to walk and how to sit wearing hoops. So, so I very much appreciated that, and I certainly remember.
Thank you again, everyone.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me fine? Yeah. All right. I'm Philip Brigham, class of 1997, and it's my pleasure, my privilege, to be presenting the Walter Anderson Award. Dr. Walter Anderson was the Antioch Music Department Director back in 1946, from 1946 to 1965. He was the first African-American department head at what at the time was a traditionally white institution in the country. After Dr. Anderson had finished his time in Antioch, he went on, thank you. After Dr. Anderson finished at Antioch, he went on to work with the National Endowment of the Arts. And this award is presented to people who have taken steps and worked towards furthering diversity and inclusion to break down racial and ethnic barriers. We're going to be awarding we're giving the award this year to Marty Rosenbluth. Marty, I'll tell you a little bit about Marty. Marty entered Antioch in 1976. He was here for about 3 years and decided that he was going to move on to other things in his life. So he didn't quite finish, and he went on and went to the West Bank shortly after that, lived there for about 7.5 years, working on human rights issues involving Palestinians there. After he had done that, he started working in documentary filmmaking. His human rights work in the West Bank led him into doing documentaries about the human rights issues that were there. Continued to work in documentary film for a while. And sometime in the late 90s, Marty was contacted by Bob Devine and asked if he would like to come back to Antioch to teach about documentary filmmaking. At that time, Marty reminded Bob that he still hadn't graduated and didn't have a bachelor's degree. And Bob said, that's fine, we'll work it out. So Marty came back and started teaching the Documentary Film Institute during the summers. While he was here, he had occasion to go to the registrar's office where Athena Frederick was working at the time. Hi, Athena. They were working on some issue with a student, and while he was there, Athena said, Marty, wouldn't you like to just see what you have to do to finish up your degree? So they took a look at what he had outstanding, how many credits he needed. And the credits he had outstanding were all things that he was qualified to teach and was going to be teaching at the Documentary Film Institute. So Marty worked out a deal with Athena and the college that he would get credit for teaching these courses. And so after 20 years of co-op, Marty got his degree in 1999. Marty then went on to law school, and that's what brings us to what we're presenting him the award for today. He started in law school interested in doing more work with international human rights. But shortly into law school, Marty had the realization that there are human rights violations going on here in our country now. Human rights violations involving people being deported, involving families being broken up. And Marty went into immigration law and became an immigration rights defense attorney. He's been working that, how long have you been doing that? He's been doing that for 11 years now. And he's done some fantastic work. Marty currently lives in the bustling metropolis of Lumpkin, Georgia. He moved to Lumpkin intentionally because in Lumpkin is the Stewart Immigration Center. The Stewart Immigration Center is built 100 miles from nowhere in Georgia, and there's intentionality behind building that center there. It makes it a lot more difficult for the detainees to have access to adequate legal representation. So Marty moved there in order to be accessible to these individuals who are there. And so we just want to thank you for the work that you've done and to honor you with this award. I'm going to give you all a little bit more of the story about the awards here. The awards were made by Beth Holyoke. She's a Holyoke, sorry. She's a ceramic artist. She lives here in Yellow Springs. Been working in ceramics for about 20 years. She's had numerous local and regional exhibitions of her work and drawings, and as well as her paper making. Among her exhibits, her work has been shown at the Dayton Visual Arts Center, Earlham College, and the Yellow Springs Arts Council Gallery. Along with, I'm going to massacre. Thank you, Katie Seidel. Thank you. She has created numerous public art benches, mosaic trash and recycling cans, and other tile installations around Yellow Springs and the Dayton area. I'm sure you all have seen many of these. She's also been involved in efforts to help and to illustrate the efforts of those seeking refuge from the chaos and danger of wars during 2016, 17, and 18, including 3 trips to volunteer at refugee camps in Greece. So that is the Artist of the Award, and I'm, again, proud to present this to Marty Rosenbluth.
And they actually managed to get my whole name onto the plaque, which is very impressive. It's particularly humbling for me to have a plaque made by Beth, because on her own, she just went to volunteer in refugee camps in Greece on 3 separate occasions. And, oh, it's not on? Is this better? Hey, how's that? No? Yes? Okay. And 2 summers ago, it is on? Okay. How's that? You think as a former videographer I would know what I'm doing here. But no, on my chin, like this. And I'm not going to get like a scratchy thing from my beard. Okay. So it's particularly humbling for me because 2 summers ago, I volunteered in refugee camps in Greece as an attorney, helping people from Syria and other countries who were trying to get asylum. And I know what those refugee camps are like, and it's no easy place to be. But what particularly struck me about working in those refugee camps was the similarity, not only in the stories that the refugees were telling about why they fled, but also in how the European Union governments treated them. And I had this delusion, maybe, that somehow the European governments were treating their refugees better. And it definitely was not at all the case. And it was a real wake-up call to me that when we're dealing with refugee rights, when we're dealing with asylees, it really is a global problem. That it's not just isolated to the Trump administration. I wish it was, but it really isn't true. Before I jump into my remarks, I need to give a shout out to two other people, in addition to Athena, who made it possible for me to go to law school. But Annie Bolin, who I did co-facilitated the Documentary Film Institute with, and of course my life partner and best friend, Liz Stern, who I met here in a planning meeting for a Marxist feminist study tour to the Soviet Union, back when the Soviet Union still existed. And without her, being at home in North Carolina, I couldn't be doing the work I'm doing now in Georgia. So I just wanted to acknowledge her. And also too, Peggy promised to be brief. I'm not making any such promise. Attorneys write papers that are thousands of pages long. We call them briefs. But I really will do my best, and I'm told I have half an hour. So I want to focus on two issues, and I've been speaking to people in the past 2 days. And when I was nominated for this award, and I agreed to come down to take it, I don't think anybody had any idea that immigrant rights would be so much at the top of everybody's consciousnesses. And I want to focus on two issues which are very much interrelated, where there's been a lot of discussion in the media and in public opinion in the past few weeks. The first is the separation of children from their families, from their parents. And the second is the changes in how the Trump administration is dealing with asylum cases. And these two are very much linked together. And if at any point, I'm serious here, if at any point I start, babbling in legal gobbledygook, just kind of like wave your hands in distress, and I'll try to translate into English. The first thing I want to say, which is really important to understand, is that the separation of families due to our immigration policies is not a new thing in any way, shape, or form. And for the past 10 years, past 11 years in doing my work, when people ask me, what I do for a living, I say, I try to keep families together. Because every person who's deported from the United States is leaving someone behind. Whether it's their U.S. citizen children, whether it's U.S. citizen spouses, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's neighbors, whether it's coworkers, they're always leaving somebody behind. And in fact, when I was visiting a client of mine last week at the Stewart, which I know it's the Stewart Immigration Center, but I call it the Stewart Deportation Center because that's really what it is. And he said, we were watching TV in the pod, and the news came on that the Trump administration was stopping its policy of separating families. And he said, what about me? What about me? What about my family? He has 3 U.S. citizen kids. He has a U.S. citizen spouse. But because he can't check each and every box that he needs to check in order to be able to stay here, he's now facing the dilemma of, does he, get deported on his own? Or does he take his family back to El Salvador, where their lives will be at risk? Now, it is new, I admit it is new, to rip babies from their mother's arms and then lose them. We certainly haven't seen that before. But I really honestly can't think of a single case that I've handled in the past 10 years where there wasn't some form of family separation involved. And that's very important to keep in mind. And then in addition to that, once people are deported, then they face the dilemma of, well, do they try to come back to be with their families, to reunify with their families. And now, if they come back, they face potential jail sentences of between 5 and 20 years in federal custody if they're caught. And obviously, I'm not going to give any identifying information, but I spoke with a client, just the other week who said, of course I'm going to come back. Of course I'm going to try to come back. I need to be with my family. Kids need their dads. I will do anything it takes to try to come back. And I difficulty in figuring out which of my clients' stories I wanted to tell. So I'm going to tell two of them. One of which was from a client I represented when I was in the refugee camp in Greece, and one who I represented in the immigration court in Charlotte, North Carolina. Just to give you an idea of how, the only word I could think of is stupid, the governments are in dealing with these asylum cases, and how they refuse to acknowledge the humanity of the individuals involved. And I've never yet gotten through the story without choking up and starting to tear up. So if I do that, someone's going to have to grab some tissues. But I met a couple in the refugee camp in Greece. And again, just to paint you a picture, there's no paved roads. It's all gravel or dirt or worse. And there was this young woman who was pushing a guy in a wheelchair, up and down these steep hills, day in, day out, in the 100-degree heat. And their story was that he had already been pretty much granted asylum. The government had pretty much said, okay, we're going to give you asylum. He was from Syria, and the reason why he was in the wheelchair is that he was so badly tortured in Assad's jails that he couldn't walk, because they beat him on the soles of his feet so severely that he couldn't walk. And you would think that since they were married, that she would get asylum as well, right? That just follows logically. However, she was from Morocco, and he was from Syria. And in the boat, on the, I don't think I have to go into detail. People know how people get from Turkey to Greece, in these little dinghies. I mean, people have seen all that footage and stuff. And in the dinghy, while they were crossing, the dinghy started to sink. And so people were saying, we have to throw all the luggage overboard. And one of the things that got thrown overboard was all their documents, including their marriage certificate. Now, this woman, from Morocco, was a victim of domestic violence that was so severe that she fled Morocco and went to Syria in the beginning of the Syrian civil war, because the only person she knew who she could go to, the only place that she knew that where she could go and she would be welcome, was her grandmother's house in Syria. So because she was Moroccan and he was from Syria, the European Union, I don't know what to call them, decision makers, the asylum officers, refused to believe that they were married. Now, picture this. Get this picture in your mind. She's pushing this wheelchair, and she was 85 pounds soaking wet. I mean, she was really a very, petite woman, and her husband was rather big. And the mere fact that she was pushing him around in a wheelchair in this heat, if that didn't show at least true love and devotion, what does it prove? I mean, why did they need a marriage certificate? And their case just took months and months and months, and I spent hours and hours arguing with the European officials. And thankfully, after I left, I heard that she had won her case and was able to stay with her husband. But it was just the viciousness, the venality, the raw stupidity of saying, well, first of all, you're from Morocco and he's from Syria, so we don't really, think you were married, and secondly, where are your documents? Second story I want to relate, I don't know if I need to kind of warn people if I'm going to use graphic language, but I had an asylum client from Guatemala, and she was kidnapped with a friend of hers in a bar in Guatemala, and her friend was raped and killed in front of her. And she was raped and she was shot in the face, but the gun misfired, so she had really bad powder burns and a lot of blood and stuff, but she had the presence of mind to play dead. And she then testified against against her assailants, who were known gang members and came from prominent families in the village that she came from. So she had protection, and so she testified against them in court, which is honestly, it's rare. I mean, most people don't bother because they don't think they're going to get any justice. By a miracle, all three guys were found guilty in the court. And they were given 1 week of house arrest. So after they got out from house arrest, of course, they came after her again. And she went to the prosecutor's office and asked if they could protect her. And they said, no, we're really sorry. There's nothing we can do to protect you. Your only option is to flee the country. And this case was in Charlotte, and the judge denied her asylum claim. And he gave 2 reasons. The first was that it didn't actually rise to the level of persecution. And the second was that she couldn't identify what particular social group she belonged to. In other words, this is just gang violence, this is just crime, there's no reason why she was singled out. And the reason I picked that story was that the judge who, and I use judge in its loosest possible sense, but the judge who made that decision, okay, is the judge that wrote the decision for Jeff Sessions, okay, that's now being used to deny domestic violence survivors the right to apply for asylum. Okay, this was the judge. And again, I could go on with legal explanations for a long time, but it's not really necessary. It's just common sense, right? I mean, the reason why victims of domestic violence seek asylum in the United States, the reason why victims of gang violence seek asylum in the United States is because the government cannot and does not want to protect them, right? And so, I mean, the fact that domestic violence victims in Guatemala and El Salvador and other countries can't get protection from the police is the fact that, it's just part of the culture, right? The police don't want to intervene. The police don't want to get involved. The police are corrupt. They'll take, bribes from the husbands or whatever. And in the case of gang violence, very often the gangs are working with the police hand in hand, side by side. So the Trump administration this week just dramatically changed the rules and regulations for applying for asylum. So now I'm going to finish the sentence, then I'm going to back up. Now the credible fear officers, who are like the first people who these asylees come to, are now being told to deny anybody who's claiming credible fear based on gang violence or on domestic violence. Okay, it's completely illegal under international law. It's completely illegal under U.S. law. Each case has to be evaluated on its own. They can't just make a blanket statement like that. And when the Trump administration and the media and the right-wing pundits and all the other slime that oozed out of the earth, say that these people are illegals, that is 100% not true on the face of it, because the way you're supposed to apply for asylum is to get here any way you can, and then ask for the right to apply for asylum. So when the media calls them illegals, when Trump calls them illegals, and that's just bullshit. Pardon my language, just isn't true. These people, are doing, exactly what they're supposed to do. They're fleeing their homes because their lives are in danger. They're seeking protection of the United States. And now the U.S. government reacts to that by ripping, their babies from their arms and losing them. So what do we do? And that's always the question that everybody asks me, what do we do? And I think the answer really is that we have to organize. And I don't want to get into a long debate and discussion about, the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party. But I practiced immigration law under Obama for 6 years. I practiced under Obama for 6 years. And Obama deported more people than every president between 1900 and 1999 combined. Okay? So, I'm not saying that, voting doesn't have to be part of the plan, but the only reason why Obama stopped deporting so many people is because people organized. And all across the country, the Dreamers, these I don't want to call them kids, young people, occupied congressional offices. Democrats, not the Republicans. They didn't think they could convince the Republicans, but they occupied Democratic members of Congress's office, and they demanded action. And the Democratic Party got scared shitless, because they knew they were at risk of losing the midterms. And that's what created the change. So vote, yeah, absolutely. I'm a registered voter, but we're going to have to remain organized, and we're going to have to remain vigilant. And part of that has to be what's now called intersectionality, right? Building links between different movements, building links between different communities. So while Trump is talking about building walls, we have to think about building bridges, like between our communities, so we can organize together and so we can protect each other. And the closer you look at issues, you can see the links between these different issues. So the same week that we got these memos from the Trump administration saying that, it's, non-state actors, it's crime, it's not our problem, yeah, there's corruption, but, the countries have to deal with that themselves. We learned that the Trump administration was putting pressure on the United Nations to weaken their investigation into corruption in Guatemala. And why? It was a thank you for Trump to the president of Guatemala for voting with the United States at the UN on the resolution on moving the embassy to Jerusalem. You can't make this stuff up. And don't even get me started, on using military aid and high tariffs to put pressure on Ecuador to back down on the resolution on breastfeeding. Now, where does most of the military aid to Ecuador go? What is it used for? It's used for fighting the gangs. So we have these policies that are just completely contradictory. So while the government claims that they're taking these actions in the interest of national security, while the government claims that they're taking these actions in the interest of patriotism, let's be really clear. These policies are based on nothing other than racism, xenophobia, and intolerance. Can I give you all a 10-second Arabic lesson? Can I do that? All Arabic words are based on a 3-letter root. And the root for the Arabic word for to organize are the same as the root for the Arabic word to string together pearls. And that's how we have to see organizing. We have to talk to our neighbors, we have to talk to our friends, we have to talk to our coworkers, and we need to expose what's going on. I don't often quote French philosophers, but I have 2 French philosopher quotes, which is probably a record. It's okay. And I used to be a professor, right? So it's okay. So a French philosopher once said that when the movement is moving poorly, when the movement isn't moving forward, people argue about what color to paint the office. But when the movement is moving well, people don't notice that the walls need to be painted. And that's one of my favorite philosopher quotes. And the other thing, too, is another French philosopher once said that in order to build a tall building, you must first dig a deep hole. And there's no question. I'm pushing 60, but this is definitely one of the darkest times I've ever lived through, okay? But it doesn't mean that we give up. And I'm on these immigration attorney listservs and bulletin boards, and some people are saying, this is a disaster, you never win another asylum case again, this is the apocalypse, and others are like, we're just going to continue to fight and just use other tactics. We're just going to continue to organize. We're just going to continue to do the best work we can and to fight against this. And I think part of that is that we need to reclaim the mantle of patriotism, right? Trump is saying that they are the patriots, and it's the people who are fighting against this that are the true patriots. And in the immortal words of the great patriot John Paul Jones, we have not yet begun to fight. So thank you very much. I finished 4 minutes early, just for the record. And I'm going to be hanging out in room 330 if people have other questions, because I know people have probably a lot of questions they want to ask.
There, I saw you, Danny.
We have time for one question.
I got time for a question.
Just one question. First of all, Marty, you are my new American hero. I'm a friend with Marty on Facebook, and I really encourage people to make a friend with Marty on Facebook, because what you get is a frontline experience of his work with immigrants and the impact that it has You personalize it for me. You inform me. I also get to know about wags and salsa, and
My dog.
the muffins that you make and the cookies that you make that nourish yourself and other people who drop by your house. So I want to thank you for that. There is a movement happening that's getting some momentum about abolish ICE. And it's not very realistic, but it is something. And I wonder what you think about that, whether it's a flank as a tactic and a strategy.
Yeah, and here I'm going to disagree with a lot of my immigrant rights colleagues, is that I don't really think it's a good tactic, because it's too much of a buzzword. So when the right wing hears abolish ICE, what they hear is stop enforcing immigration law and open borders. And I just don't think that's particularly smart. Now, there are people who are saying abolish ICE who have a very sophisticated analysis, and when they say that, they're talking about the fact that, ICE is a huge bureaucracy. It has too many tentacles. There's no supervision. There's no control. There's no protections. But I think if we learned nothing else from President Trump, is that policy by soundbite or by tweets is not a very, very good idea. So, I think that ICE is a really, really bad agency. I think they do a whole lot of horrible things. But just to say abolish ICE, I don't think that's productive. I do want to add one thing that I forgot to mention, is that this week we had our second suicide and our third death in less than 12 months in the Stewart Deportation Center. In the Stewart Immigration Center where I work. Third death and second suicide in less than 12 months.
Marty, you might want to clarify that this is a detention center with an immigration court.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Private.
Private? Thank you. Certain things I don't think to mention because I just a part of my brain. But where I work, it's one of the largest, if not the largest, immigrant detention centers in the country. It's privately run by a for-profit company called Core Civic. And inside the deportation center, inside the detention center, is an immigration court. An immigration court. So, not only is it the worst detention center in the country, but it's probably the worst, if not one of the worst, immigration courts in the country. The national average for approval of asylum cases in immigration courts is 45%. In Stewart, it's 6. 6.
We got to actually wrap up because there's another session that's about to start in here in about a minute. No, in less than in 15 minutes.
Oh, we have 15 minutes.
I'm sorry. Marty is really generous with his time, and he's going to be out there. And I know people want to hear each other's questions. Problem is, we have to set up for the next session.
So room 330 down the hall. I'll be sitting in there.
1:30.
1:30. Oh, sorry, 1:30.
3:30 would be up.
There is no third floor. Room 130. It's 330. That's where I got confused. So I'll be in room 130 if people have more questions.